Hey, welcome to another episode of Cutter One. I am your host, Jay Just Jay, your resident troublemaker and your resident culture warrior. I hope you're all doing well. It is finally Friday. We just have a little bit left. Just got to get through those last couple of hours of work, and then the weekend is upon us. And thank the gods. All right, let's get into it. All right, this one is coming to us from the good folks over at CBR.com. And this is the Lord of the Rings movies ignored a crucial part about the Balrog. The Lord of the Rings Balrogs were terrifying, and the Fellowship of the Ring film did a great job of portraying Durin's Bane, but it ignored this crucial detail. This is by Blake Hawkins. So let's see what they have to say. Immediately, my radar has gone up because I'm thinking it's another pot shot at Peter Jackson, by the Rings of Pewter crowd, because, remember, they have to make Peter Jackson's films no longer the standard by which Rings of Pewter gets judged. But let's see what Mr. Hawkins has to say. And it says, all right, The Lord of the Rings was filled with terrifying and powerful figures. There was the nameless Watcher in the water. There were Barrow-wights with mysterious origins. There were even Nazgul, Sauron's wraiths that were wrongfully chained to Middle-earth. Frodo and his companions encountered all of those figures, and they were terrified each time. However, they were much more afraid of the Balrog that they encountered in Moria. As the Fellowship approached the bridge of Khazad-dûm, Durin's Bane emerged. Gandalf told them to run because they were no match for the fiery demon. So they fled, and Gandalf sacrificed himself after giving a threatening speech. Peter Jackson's The Fellowship of the Ring had an awesome-looking Balrog, but it left out a crucial feature that would have made the monster all the more terrifying. All right, let's see what they're referencing here. It says, Peter Jackson depicted Durin's Bane as a lava-encased monster that was brutish and brainless. It was drawn by the power of the One Ring, and it attacked the Fellowship without thought. But that simply wasn't the case in Tolkien's version of Fellowship of the Ring. In the book, the Balrog was much more intelligent. It was a master of sorcery, and its strength even surprised Gandalf. Here's part of a passage from Fellowship of the Rings, The Bridge of Khazad-dûm chapter. Quote, but I found myself suddenly faced by something that I have not met before. I could think of nothing to do but to try and put a shutting spell on the door. Then something came into the chamber. I felt it through the door, and the orcs themselves were afraid and fell silent. What it was, I cannot guess, but I have never felt such a challenge. The counterspell was terrible. It nearly broke me. For an instant, the door left my control and began to open. I had to speak a word of command, unquote. As that passage shows, the Balrog was a powerful magic user. That makes sense given Balrog's status in creation. Like Gandalf and Saruman, the fiery demons were Maiar, gifted with the powers of creation. No. When Morgoth corrupted them and gave them his fire, that's when they became evil monsters who served darkness. Yet they clearly retained their skill in magic. Other important details about the Lord of the Rings Balrogs. The Balrog's movie depiction was pretty cool, and because of that, the Rings of Pewter chose to keep the same appearance. However, the creature wasn't truly book accurate. To maintain an air of fear and mystery, Tolkien left his description somewhat vague, but there were a few important details. For one, the monster never roars, growls, or sneers at Gandalf and the Fellowship. The monster was an ancient demon, so it simply lurked and attacked with a silent, malignant purpose. In contrast, Peter Jackson had his Balrog roaring at Gandalf repeatedly. And there's a reason for that, but I'll touch on that after. The other point of contention is the demon's wings. Tolkien wrote that, quote, the shadow about it reached out like two vast wings, unquote. So maybe the Balrog had wings, and maybe it didn't. It's something that fans still debate. Ralph Bakshi's 1978 adaptation gave its Balrog wings and allowed it to fly. Meanwhile, Peter Jackson's version Peter Jackson's version stayed closest to the source material and left its Balrog's wings ambiguous. Regardless of the wings, though, portraying the Balrog as a master of sorcery would have done wonders for either adaptation of the demon. It would have made it more intelligent, malignant, and powerful, which would have made Gandalf's sacrifices even more important and heartfelt. Okay, and that is coming from Blake Hawkins over at CBR.com. All right. So here's my take. All right, my take is yes. On a certain level, I do agree that the Balrogs in the book much more intimidating. Well, I wouldn't say intimidating. A much scarier foe for the reason that they're mentioning, right? Because of it does demonstrate this control over magic that's at least at the very least equal or like the counter to Gandalf's level of mastery over magic and sorcery, right? So that much is true. However, you have to understand the medium of film, okay? And that's the part that I think that Mr. Hawkins here is forgetting, right? Yes, in the books, the Balrog does not growl or sneer or roar. It is sort of this silent being. It's also not this larger than life being, right? It is depicted as being more man shaped, right? According to the book, it is more man shaped, less demon shaped, right? And the wings have always been for a long time a point of contention. That's nothing new. That's always been a debate amongst Tolkien fans. You guys know this about wings or no wings, right? Because Tolkien is very vague, like intentionally vague about that, right? Whether it's just the shadows reaching out like wings, i.e., spreading out, or if it's actual wings, right? But the Balrog is much more man-like in appearance in the book, or at least from what I'm remembering of the book, right? Not this hulking, beastie-looking thing, right? Now, the ones in Peter Jackson films are freaking awesome looking, right? I love that aesthetic that he gave them, and I think that's why Rings of Pewter chose to go with that aesthetic, right? But on film, and I'm talking in regards to Peter Jackson specifically, because the Rings of Pewter hasn't really touched on the Balrog. There's been like 2 10-second scenes with the Balrog, one with Durin's Bane, and another when they're talking about how Mithril came into being, right? But there hasn't been really any sort of we haven't really seen a Balrog in Rings of Pewter. But in terms of Peter Jackson's films, the reason why you can't have them be this silent thing that just attacks, right, is because visually that's boring. And I hate to say it, but it's true. Is visually it would be a lot more confusing to an audience, a lot less impactful to an audience if the Balrog is just 100% book accurate, right? Now, I know some people that are going to say, well, Jay, aren't you all about like adhering to Tolkien stuff? Yes, I understand that, but I also acknowledge you have to have a little bit of artistic interpretation. Now, I will say that, yes, Peter Jackson made some changes and drifted from the lore in certain aspects of his films, and they are noticeable if you're a fan of Tolkien's work, but they don't change the overall story or the emotional impact or the overarching complexities of what's going on, right? As opposed to the way the Rings of Pewter does. The Rings of Pewter attempts to rewrite certain character story arcs, Okay, just completely disregards everything Tolkien wrote about them and chooses to rewrite and come up with their own version of things, and that's the fundamental difference. So yes, I am willing to accept a little bit of give and take when it comes to how, adhering to it. And I do know as a filmmaker that to have the Balrog be 100% book accurate would that scene and that sequence in Fellowship of the Ring, the film, would not have been as visually impressive, or story wise impressive, to an audience, if it was 100% book accurate. And that's why I think Peter Jackson was willing to play a little bit with its overall aesthetic and look. In terms of the roaring and snarling and stuff like that, there's artistic reasons why you would do that. Because Tolkien can, as an author who's dealing in the written word in writing a book, you have a lot more flexibility in how you convey your ideas, right? Because you can get into the mind of Gandalf, his inner thoughts, right, in his inner monologue in his head, or as well as with any of the other characters, right, as well as in addition to describing the scene proper. In a film, you don't necessarily have that. You can't have a voiceover of what Gandalf is thinking while he's interacting with the Balrog. So you have to visually have the Balrog be a counterpoint and react to what's coming from Gandalf. The whole "you shall not pass," I'm a wielder of the flame imperishable. Go back to your master. Servant of Udun. Go back to Udun and all that stuff. The whole speech that Gandalf gives. You have to have the Balrog react to that in order to make it more impactful. Because if he doesn't, with the aesthetic that it has, it would just come across as big giant fire monster beastie, right? No intelligence there, no ability to communicate there, right? So you have to have it react to, Gandalf is not only threatening it, he's insulting it when he gives that whole speech, right? And so you have to have the Balrog, who literally on paper anyway is Gandalf's equal. Okay, we can't forget that the Balrog are also Maiar, which is what Gandalf. So this Balrog, Durin's Bane, is Gandalf's equal in a lot of ways. So when Gandalf is giving his speech and threatening him and basically insulting him, basically saying you're just a servant of the shadow, you have to have the Balrog react to that visually and auditorily, for the audience to understand that this thing is sitting there like, bitch, please. You know what I mean? Because you can't just have it looking at Gandalf like, food. You know what I'm saying? You would lose that sort of sense of dread that this is not just a dumb animal that you're dealing with. This is something that's on par with Gandalf, right? So when Gandalf insults it, this thing sort of sniffs like, bitch, who you talking to? And that's why Peter Jackson made those decisions. And I think that it's a little disingenuous for people like Blake Hawkins to turn around and just take a pot shot and say, oh, well, this was ignored, okay? And it was crucial, but it was ignored. I don't think Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens and Peter Jackson actively ignored that. They were faced with a dilemma of how do we convey that this thing is on equal footing to get. It's not just a big monster. It's not just like a fiery cave troll, right? That this is something different. This is something that's on par and can go toe to toe with Gandalf, right? And not just physically, but intellectually and sort of in all aspects, right? And so they were sort of forced to have to show that and convey that with roars and snarls and having it sort of visually respond to Gandalf and stuff like that. Because without it, if you have it do what it does in the book, okay, you lose that sense of dread that comes with it, okay? At least that's my interpretation as a filmmaker. Looking at it from a filmmaker as well as a Tolkien fan, I can understand why those changes were made. Whereas, you know, if you don't do them right, you will lose something in that whole sequence. And I think it would be less impactful and less memorable to a lot of people if you had the Balrog in the films be 100% lore accurate to the books. And I know it's weird that like I'm arguing against staying 100% lore accurate, but understand I'm talking within a very small, well-defined area, gray area, right? I'm not talking the level of abandoning the books that Rings of Pewter has done, where they completely just, in a lot of ways, contradict things that Tolkien wrote, okay? Or flat out ignore them and replace them with stuff that they've just made up. I'm talking about trying to impart the sense of dread and the sense of that this thing is on par with Gandalf. This is Gandalf's equal in a lot of ways, right? And how do you impart that in a visual medium? Like, again, when you're writing a book and you're talking about it in a book, you have a lot more flexibility than when you have images on screen, when you're showing it in a film. And how do you do that? Well, you have to have the Balrog react to things that Gandalf is saying. You have to show it to be this smart killing machine demon. You can't just have it be, like I said, like a fiery cave troll, right? You have to show that there's something going on up here that's aware of Gandalf and is willing to go toe to toe and can go toe to toe with Gandalf. And I think that's why they did it. So I would say I agree with Mr. Hawkins in that it would have been cool to see more of the Balrogs, the whole battle with the door initially. I think that would have been a cool sequence had Peter Jackson added it. But I disagree with Mr. Hawkins in some of his other criticisms about the Balrog and its depiction in the films. I think Peter Jackson went the right way in showing that, this thing was intelligent and on par with Gandalf. So anyway, that's just my opinion. That is just how I view it, both as a filmmaker and a Tolkien fan. But let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Would you have rather have seen a more strictly adhering to the book depiction of the Balrog and that whole sequence in the Bridge of Khazad-dûm? Would you rather have had it be more like what the book was, or do you like the way Peter Jackson and crew interpreted and adapted that scene to the film? Right? Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. It'll be interesting to see where people fall on this one. Either way, I still love the aesthetic that they gave it. Totally awesome. Anyway, that's gonna do it for this one. We're finally heading into the weekend, folks. Yeah. Couldn't get here soon enough. All right, that's going to do it. If you like the video, give the video a like. If you feel like sharing the video, by all means do so. It helps us with the YouTube algorithm. It helps us get seen. And if you have not already, I hope you would consider subscribing to the channel. We're a fun bunch, and we are all about, Tolkien and his work and discussing these things as well as other high fantasy stuff. We're a fun bunch, right? The army of beautiful badasses. And as always, if you are a returning subscriber, thank you from the bottom of my heart. It does mean a lot. I'm hoping to get the channel to 1,000 subscribers by June 1st. We are inching our way closer there. I think we're up to 711 as of filming this right now. So we're getting there. We're not speeding our way there. We're sort of taking our time, being methodical and pacing ourselves, but we are getting there, and that is always awesome. So also remember to join us over on the Discord. We got a Discord. I'll put the link down in the description below. And also, we've got some merch. If you feel like buying some merch, we got some merch. I'll put that link down in the description below. All right, folks, that's going to do it for this one. Remember to be good, be awesome, be safe, but more importantly, stay more dorkish. Peace.